2001 was quite a year for video games. Two brand new consoles, the GameCube and Xbox, made a big splash in the market.
It doesn't matter what you think, Bill.
Existing players like the PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast expanded their software libraries in a big way. Now, how big are we talking? From the beginning of the year until the end, we got Sonic Adventure 2, Final Fantasy X, Silent Hill 2, Devil May Cry, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, Halo, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Jak and Daxter, and so very many more. Yeah, it was one hell of a year, so you'd be forgiven for overlooking the small but mighty world of handhelds. A world that was, at the time, in the palm of Nintendo's hands, and their hands alone. It'd be another 4 years before the PSP would threaten Nintendo's handheld supremacy, so for now, they ruled the roost. If you never owned a Game Boy Advance, it may be tempting to dismiss the little guy as a kid's toy. A handy way to play Super Mario on the school bus or Tetris on a road trip. But to do so would be a grave underestimation. The GBA was impressive from a technical standpoint with its 32-bit processor and 15-hour battery life, but what really stands the test of time here is its game library. The Game Boy Advance has, in my opinion, one of the greatest collections of software among any console ever made. Top-shelf first-party, top-shelf third-party, and a selection of Super Nintendo greats ported over with no compromises. It was Nintendo firing on all cylinders, and it may have been what kept the company afloat as the GameCube failed to meet sales expectations. The Cube and its predecessor, the N64, did not share the Super Nintendo's reputation for being RPG machines. However, the Game Boy Advance was more than willing to carry on that torch. With beloved entries in popular series such as Final Fantasy and Castlevania, Nintendo's relationship with developers like Square and Konami was maintained almost entirely by the GBA. Yet for all the big players that invested their energy into the handheld, there is another unlikely ally whose unmistakable style and commitment to polished experiences would leave an indelible impression on those who would stumble across their work. Camelot, King Arthur's court, the focal point of Arthurian legend, headquarters for the Knights of the Round Table. Its mere mention brings to mind fantastical adventures, chivalric conquests, magical artifacts, and courageous exploits. Also that song from Monty Python I can't play without getting copyright claimed. This, however, is not the Camelot we're discussing today, although its adventurous spirit is ever present in the games of Camelot Software Planning, a Japanese game developer with a storied history. The studio began as a partner of Sega, and before it took on the Camelot moniker, it was creatively known as Consumer Development Studio 4, or CD4 for short, and Sonic Software Planning shortly thereafter. Don't worry, I won't pronounce the exclamation mark anymore. In this primordial phase, their first project was a wizardry-inspired dungeon crawler called Shining in the Darkness. Its budget was tight, but it found a moderate success. Enough so to justify the development of a sequel, a game that would come to be known as Shining Force. Foregoing the dungeon crawling of Shining in the Darkness, Shining Force and its sequels would follow in the footsteps of PC-88 strategy RPGs, games like Silver Ghost and Bokosuka Wars. While there's some obvious similarities to Fire Emblem as well, designer Hiroyuki Takahashi claims that it was not a source of inspiration. Regardless, even in their earliest work, you can see the foundation of what would become Camelot's trademark design, both mechanically and aesthetically. After releasing the third installment of Shining Force on the Sega Saturn, Camelot began to develop a relationship with Nintendo, one that would continue to this very day. They released a series of well-received Mario sports games, including Mario Golf and Mario Tennis, both of which in retrospect have that unique Camelot style, despite how different they were. The music, the character art renders, and sprite work, the games all just have this signature touch. Also, Camelot invented Waluigi, so you owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. While their Mario sports projects kept the lights on, Camelot was conceptualizing a return to the world of RPGs from whence they came. The theoretical dev timeline coincided nicely with the release of the Game Boy Advance, and so the team got to work on an ambitious RPG which would come to be known as Golden Sun. Rumors swirled for years that its development actually began on the N64. While Takahashi has repeatedly rejected these claims, it's interesting to imagine a Camelot RPG released so late in the N64's lifespan. Ultimately, the game was released in the latter half of 2001 and early 2002 across all territories, and it left a positive impression, to say the very least. It was praised for its stunning presentation and unique spins on traditional JRPG elements. It, as well as its sequel, have gone down in history as some of the most beloved RPGs of all time, and the GBA's de facto RPG representatives. There's plenty to say about that sequel, as well as a certain third game that many people prefer to not acknowledge, but those are stories for another day. For now, let's find some double A's and power on that Game Boy, because I'm taking a look back at Golden Sun. Well, no, I'm not actually using a Game Boy Advance, but, it's a nostalgic visual. First, my experience with this game. I have none. I feel like that would suffice, but just for the sake of full disclosure, I'll admit that I rented The Lost Age from Rogers Video when I was young without knowing it was a sequel. Rogers is like a Canadian, you know what, it's not important. Anyway, I don't really remember much of anything, so I think it's safe to say I'm going in blind. The only thing I know for sure is that Golden Sun is a great name for a game. Immediately, I'm thinking of adventure, camaraderie, I'm thinking vast horizons, limitless potential, so, you got a leg up here, Golden Sun. Don't screw it up. After we're introduced to the main character, Isaac, via a name entry screen, things pop off pretty quick. The small village of Vale is in danger as the nearby Mount Aleph begins to erupt. People scramble to evacuate, save their loved ones. It's a pretty chaotic scene. We're introduced to Isaac's best friend Garrett and given a feel for navigation, dialogue, all that jazz. Often dialogue will present you with a superficial yes or no choice, and I have to say, I'm very amused by the pictures they use.
I'm hurt pretty badly. Do you think I'll die?
Yes! Throughout the chaos, you can glean a few pieces of valuable information. Some of the village denizens are in possession of a power called Psynergy, the nature of which is not yet explained, but you can safely assume it's psychic power and energy, working synergistically. A boy named Felix is in imminent danger, and, that name rings a bell. Even the character sprite looks familiar. I don't know, maybe it's my imagination. Isaac's mother and Felix's sister, Jenna, run off to find help from Psynergy users, with Isaac and Garrett joining shortly after. You can question the townsfolk and learn a little bit more about Psynergy in the process. Namely, that it has elemental properties, and like physical fitness, it tends to require development and loses its effectiveness in old age. Despite our finding a Psynergy user, a massive boulder comes tumbling down from Mount Aleph, killing Jenna's family as well as Isaac's father. Damn, it's a pretty gut-wrenching scene in a Game Boy RPG nonetheless. You know what we had for Game Boy RPGs before this? Magi Nation. Nobody was ready for this. Wandering amidst the chaos, Isaac and Garrett overhear two mysterious individuals talking about the nearby Soul Sanctum and its effect on the eruption. They don't take too kindly to eavesdropping and engage the boys in the most unwinnable early game boss fight setup I've ever seen in my life. They cut the boys down and walk away from the wrecked village. Welcome to Golden Sun. This opening excels in a few key areas, namely, I appreciate the lack of exposition dumping. To be fair, if you're gonna do it, now would be the time to do it, but any world building you can suss out here is done entirely of your own volition, just interacting with people or bookshelves, checking every crate in the village. They're all empty, by the way. The opening village segment is JRPG trope material, but it's kind of executed in the inverse here. Usually you get the comfy chit-chat section followed by the horrible tragedy. Here, you don't even see the opening title before the horrible tragedy occurs, and then the chit-chatty stuff comes later. The giant asterisk being, hey, remember how everyone died in the beginning? Yeah, in case the Breaking Bad Mexico filter didn't clue you in, this all took place in the past. We're brought to the present now, 3 years later, where the story of Golden Sun begins in earnest. During that period, Isaac and Garrett have been studying Psynergy intently. Having been subject to such terrible tragedy, they hone their strength to ensure it won't happen again. Jenna's grief, though, has been overwhelming. Rather than keeping that day at the forefront of her mind, she's tried desperately to move on, and the more her friends remember, the harder it is for her to forget. You're given a taste for Psynergy in a more casual setting, as Isaac uses his magical abilities to repair a roof. For the people of Vale, Psynergy is something to take for granted, an everyday luxury afforded to them by their quasi-chosen one status. The way things work in Golden Sun is that Psynergy users are allied with one of 4 elements, Empedocles style. You know, this picture of Empedocles makes it look like he's real tired of this element bullshit. Anyway, each of these elements is represented by some kind of spirit or god or something. I'm actually not too sure. Mars represents fire, Venus is earth, Jupiter is wind, and Mercury is water. Anyone who can use Psynergy is considered to be an adept in one of these 4 categories. Isaac is a Venus adept, for example, while Garrett and Jenna are both Mars adepts. Hey, that's pretty nice. In most RPGs, everybody gets their own element, but you know, if chance dictates these things, then it's statistically likely that your party members would double up occasionally. At this point, you can wander around the village. There are a few points of interest where you know having the right Psynergy would unlock new paths, but all you can do for now is file them away until you gain more abilities. You can also talk to the townsfolk, mostly small talk, but you can get some other perspectives on the day of the eruption as well. It seems nobody in the village walked away unscathed, and even though things are better, it'd be hard to blame the people of Vale for living in fear. Their proximity to Mount Aleph seems to have an effect on their Psynergy, making it impossible to just up and move. During those 3 years, Isaac, Garrett, and Jenna have begun associating with an elderly sage named Kraden. On their way to his house, the trio bump into those 2 characters that whooped us in the beginning. And once again, we overhear some ambiguous but unmistakably evil mutterings.
Were you eavesdropping on the conversation?
Well, see, the thing about that is, what you really do have to ask is, no, I wasn't. I was not eavesdropping. Wow, I can't believe it worked. They let the party go, having already met with Kraden, who looks visibly troubled by their visit. They told him several things about the village's temple, Soul Sanctum, things that he wishes to confirm. Now, Kraden isn't a bad guy, but he is a bad friend, and he peer pressures the group to sneak into Soul Sanctum with him and investigate. What follows is one of several stealth sections in Golden Sun. Fuck. Got him. I don't even understand why you'd patrol over there, to be honest. Soul Sanctum is our introduction to Golden Sun's dungeons, and there's actually quite a bit to say about them in general. I'll save some of that for later when I've got more context to work with and when we understand more about the game, but for now, suffice to say that Golden Sun is a puzzle dungeon game. That brings a big, beautiful smile to my face because I love puzzle dungeons, and this game does them really well. We're also introduced to the battle system, which initially is quite simple. It's turn-based with all of the commands you'd expect from such a system. Little fighting, little magic, little item usage, you know the drill. Like the original Final Fantasy, your character does not automatically attack a new target once the previous one dies. They'll opt to defend instead if that happens. This means you can't mash attack unless you actually want them to take longer. You really have to consider character strengths and enemy HP levels. You might think it's all appropriately basic for a handheld game, but there's a level of complexity that surprised me as the game went on, which I'll talk more about later. One thing that is worth talking about now is the game's visual presentation. Obviously, it's a top-down game in the style of many a Super Nintendo-era RPG. For a 2001 handheld game, it looks gorgeous. The pixel art is colorful and vibrant, character sprites and environmental objects like trees or flickering lights just pop off the screen. The level of detail in these environments is just very impressive in general. Many RPGs will liberally reuse tiles and sprites, and while there is definitely some reuse here, there's a surprising amount of assets unique to each area in-game. That amounts to a lot of variety by the end. Every area conveys its own mood, its own aesthetic. It's not a strength you'd expect, and it might not even be one you'll particularly notice, but when you do, it's hard not to appreciate it. This is the strength of Camelot's games in general. It's quantity and quality when it comes to design. There's also an impressive degree of personality packed into minimalistic cutscenes. Characters make these little gesture animations, the balloons showing their current moods and emotions, and that little squeaky talking thing that changes depending on the speaker. Simple, but it's charming and effective. Even the portraits themselves, which are literally 32 by 32 pixels, pack a tremendous amount of life and character into a tiny square on an already tiny screen. That's to say nothing about the battles, which might be the single most impressive display of the Game Boy Advance's graphical capabilities I can think of. Well, that honor might go to X vs. Sever. Even I don't know if I'm being ironic with that one. Golden Sun's battle scenes take a totally different visual approach than the overworld, and in some ways it's more distinctively Camelot. The developer had a fairly unique method of making 2D sprites out of 3D renders. Models would be captured and, in Golden Sun's case, touched up to more closely resemble the game's pixel art. It's hard to say definitively if that's the case due to the low resolution of the Game Boy Advance screen, but they bear a striking resemblance to the sprites used in Shining the Holy Ark, an earlier Camelot title which unmistakably uses that method. In any case, the visual style used in battles gives the fighters a unique kind of clay figurine look, sort of a pseudo-realism to help your brain fill in the blanks after seeing their more abstract representations on the overworld. There are a few techniques used that bring the battles to life more so than the average turn-based RPG. On a basic level, I do like that you can actually see the characters holding the weapons you've equipped on them. It's a simple thing, but it helps progression feel more tangible, if you know what I mean. There's also a lot of animation frames for even basic attacks and guards. Makes it feel like characters are acting and reacting rather than just blindly executing your commands as the player. My favorite is the slight delay that happens when you land a critical hit, followed by that gunshot impact sound. It's just the most satisfying thing. In addition, there's a level of cinematography on display in fights. As characters execute commands, the camera pans around, zooms in, and shakes, giving fights this feeling that you're in a pseudo 3D space rather than a simple plane. The downside is that the camera movements somewhat warp battle sprites, distorting some of the line work, but it's not too bad, especially considering what it adds to the fight. The magic and summon animations are absolutely fantastic as well. There is a downright exhausting list of spells and abilities, all with their own unique special effects. They look gorgeous, and the amount of particle effects on screen will sometimes bring the Game Boy to its knees as the game struggles to maintain a decent frame rate. Honestly, considering the game doesn't rely on frame rate, I kind of find the game's chugging weirdly enhances the power trip you have using a summon. Like, imagine if I came towards you with a flamethrower in real life and your frame rate dropped. Wouldn't you be more intimidated? As elaborate and wonderful as the summon animations are, they're also completely skippable, so that's a big old thumbs up for Golden Sun. I certainly skipped my fair share of them, but every so often you just have to sit back and appreciate how awesome they really look. So yeah, in case it wasn't obvious, I don't have many negative things to say about the visuals. The world map maybe looks a little bland in comparison to the colorful areas within it, but that's really nitpicking. The graphics look great, they're vibrant, stylish, and downright impressive to behold at times. When I think of Golden Sun, I'm awash with memories of lush forests, meadows, and crystal blue lakes. Also, the stupid sexy orc. I remember him too. After solving some puzzles and making it through Sol Sanctum, the group is transported to the innermost chamber. Here, Kraden finds the elemental stars, crystals made from each of the 4 elements, concentrated into their pure form. Legends say that together the stones can grant the user alchemical abilities such as transmutation. Until now, Kraden believed them only to be legend. However, it just so happens that he has 4 mithril carrying bags for them, and then he voluntells Isaac and Garrett to jump across these precarious beams to retrieve them. Damn. 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 Oh, come on.
Hurry up, boys, those elemental stars won't get themselves.
Yeah, I'll get them, 'cause you fucking made me, Kraden. Before the final star is retrieved, the party is joined by the sinister duo from earlier, this time with a masked man. Okay, I remember why the name Felix rings a bell. Remember how I said I rented the sequel to this game from Roger's Video without knowing it was a sequel? You play as Felix in that game, I remember that. So if I have to play through this entire game pretending I don't know that this is Felix— okay, no, he's taking the mask off. Okay, good, never mind. So he reveals himself to be Felix, Jenna's brother who she thought was dead. He was rescued by the 2 characters named Saturos and Menardi, who took him with them. Why he agreed or their goals aren't clear. We only know that they need the elemental stars and that Felix won't allow them to bring harm to Jenna. With the mithril bags in hand, we're forced to retrieve the final star and hand them off to the assailants. I'll just head over here. Oh, no, not that way. No, not that way either. I'll just quick jog back here. Nope, for sure not that way. Okay, no problem. Hey guys, just gonna sneak on by you here. Okay, no problem. Oops, not that way either. I'll just try to the right here. Whoop, nope, I already was there. This is so fucking awkward. Finally, we grab the Mars star, which seems to disrupt some kind of homeostasis within Sol Sanctum. The whole place begins collapsing when a beholder-looking fella called the Wise One shows up. Its presence seemed to scare the folks looking for the stars, including a newly arrived character named Alex. Forced to leave, they kidnap Jenna and Creighton, knowing that Isaac and Garrett will follow them wherever they go as a result, hand-delivering them the Mars star in the process.
You don't think they'll hurt Jenna and Creighton, do you?
Yes! The Wise One briefly explains the danger of the stars. Namely, that placing all of them in their respective temples, called lighthouses, will result in the power of alchemy being returned to the land. Whatever that means, apparently it's very bad. The Wise One manages to teleport Isaac and Garrett to safety. It can't stop Mount Aleph from erupting, but it uses all of its power to redirect the flow away from Vale. That doesn't stop the mountain's activity from scaring the hell out of townspeople, but thankfully Isaac and Garrett explain what happened. The fellas are given the task of retrieving the elemental stars and rescuing Jenna, and Creighton if they have time maybe, which results in a pretty funny scene. Everybody is like, they're only children, Elder, how can we ask this of them? And he's like, it's their fate, the Wise One has spoken. Then everybody stands there for a while, and it's like, okay, so what do we do exactly? Where's the lighthouse? What does it look like? What do we do when we get there? And he's like, I don't really know, but it's fine. Bye. Everybody is kind of upset that we don't have the slightest direction. I don't know, I think it's pretty funny. So many times in these games we just trust 16-year-olds with the fate of the world, but yeah, that's like showing up to your first day at a new job, clocking in and being told by your manager, time to get to work, and then he just like turns around and leaves. With that, the boys set off and we can finally venture out into the world map. By the way, the world map kind of vibrates when I'm walking around. This seems to happen to varying degrees no matter which way you play, and I think it's just because of the pseudo 3D that's used here. Something to do with the sprite mapping. Reminds me a little bit of SNES Mode 7 stuff. Just figured I'd mention it. Before you go too far, you'll be introduced to one of Golden Sun's most unique and significant mechanics, that being the genie. You'll find these Djinn while traversing the game, each one corresponding to one of 4 elements. This first one, for example, is a Venus genie, so it's closely aligned with Isaac. By the way, for all the people who call them Djinn and Ginny, I know you feel upset at me right now, but consider this. There are people watching who call them Djinn. Can we agree that that's the common enemy here? The way that the Djinn work is that you can allocate them to individual characters. Spoiler alert, you get 2 other party members later on. In battles, using the Djinn you have equipped will allow you to perform a special attack. Some of these are fairly simple, like Flint, whose special is just a strong melee attack. Others will paralyze enemies, heal the entire party, lots of different abilities. It starts out fairly straightforward, but becomes more complex as the game goes on. Allocating Djinn to your characters will actually alter their class, stats, and whichever Psynergy they have available for use. I love that shit, let me tell ya. I had a Nintendo Power that advertised the game called Warlocked, where you had like 50 different wizards you could choose. Me and my friend used to pick different wizards and pretend to be them when we played outside. Check it out, there's Bomb Wiz, Telewiz, Chicken Wiz, Quake Wiz, Gold Wiz? Okay, that last one's a little bit weird. In the beginning, you'll likely just give a Djinn to whichever character they match elementally, but by the end of the game, you'll have many options for different combinations. If you keep Isaac's Djinn matching him as Venus only, he'll advance from a squire to a knight to a gallant and so on, which is totally viable. In fact, a lot of people just play the game like this. But by mixing in Djinn of other elements, you can actually have him become a conjurer, a dragoon, or a ninja, all with their own pros and cons. It's an extremely free-form class system, as you can suddenly decide to change all of your character's classes with no consequence to stats or anything. You're allowed to synergize however you see fit. But this benefit can quickly become a drawback if you're not careful. See, using a genie's special ability will unequip that genie from whichever character it was on. In practice, what this means is that using these powerful skills actually downgrades your character classes during a fight and makes them become weaker, and it can be quite a significant difference. Using all of your skills in a last-ditch effort to beat a tough boss can literally have your max HP, so it's important to pick and choose when you unleash these abilities. You can spend a turn re-equipping a genie to a character, but Golden Sun can be a tough game, especially if you don't already know all of the minutiae of the Djinn system, so sometimes one turn is all it takes to lose control of the situation. Your party will also have access to summon spirits, depending on how many Djinn you currently have available. The Djinn abilities are strong, but summons are bar none the most powerful tool you have in your arsenal. The catch is that summoning them requires you to have a minimum number of Djinn on standby, meaning you cannot have them equipped. This leads to a decent level of strategy in some of the tougher fights. Summoning is the best way to dispatch bosses, but what path will you choose to get there? Will you spend your first couple of turns just wasting every genie you have, trying to get them all on standby so you can summon as quickly as possible? 80% of you probably just said yes. Will you spend each turn carefully considering which abilities make the most strategic sense to use and slowly work your way to summons? Maybe you had some foresight, maybe you saw that the next area looked like a boss zone and decided to preemptively unequip all of your Djinn in advance so you can just summon immediately when the battle starts. Hopefully you can see how this initially simple Djinn system provides some much needed value to Golden Sun's turn-based battles. It's basically as straightforward or complicated as you want it to be. The only hamstringing you is your ability to actually hunt down and find the Djinn in the world. It won't take long after leaving Vale before you find the town of Vault, which is an interesting name. According to the History of Vault Volume 1, the name comes from being cooped up in a tiny place. Talk about information overload, I can see why this series comes in volumes. In Vault, we meet our next recruitable party member, a young Jupiter adept named Ivan. Ivan is the servant of a merchant king by the name of Hammett. He was left behind by his master to search for a missing treasure called the Shaman's Rod. Isaac and Garrett agree to help him, although the game doesn't necessarily explain why this is a good idea. You'd think with what's essentially a race to the lighthouse with their friends' lives on the line, the party wouldn't have time to stop and help every Tom, Dick, and Ivan they come across. Maybe the fact that he's a Jupiter adept is critical for their own success, but they don't really hint at that or explain anything. In any case, Ivan has a special ability, mind reading. In story terms, he can peer into anyone's mind and see what they're thinking. As long as they aren't adepts, they'll never even notice. In gameplay terms, this adds another interesting dynamic to the game. In fact, boy, what a great time to talk about Psynergy in general. Yes, it's not just background noise or some way to explain why there's magic in this world. Well, okay, it is that too, but there's also more. Psynergy has practical in-game use outside of battles. There's a good variety of utility spells that can be used in the world. These are meant for specific areas to solve puzzles, uncover secrets, and just navigate through impassable terrain. Spells like Move are strictly used in the overworld to shove objects in different directions as long as you're one space away. Similar abilities like Lift or Force all have their uses situationally. The spell Reveal can be used to find hidden items or entrances to caverns. Then there's spells like Growth or Whirlwind that actually can be used in battle to cause damage and outside of battle to facilitate exploration. Growth can be used to create climbable vines, and Whirlwind can be used to rip away plant life that obscures points of interest. Like the Djinns, Psynergy is fairly simple in its application, but it adds a great deal to the game. Speaking of Djinns, Psynergy can often be used to find them while traversing the world. You'll be going about your business when suddenly you notice something is a little off. Maybe it's a seemingly unreachable ledge or an enclosure with no entrance. That's your cue to start exploring, because where there are peculiarities in the world, a Djinn is almost always close by. Often Djinn require the use of Psynergies, such as Halt, which temporarily stops them from running away. It's not just Djinn, but powerful items or accessories that are tucked away in the game's corners. Even without all of the tangible rewards, it's just fun to see all the little interactions that occur when you use Psynergy in towns. So Golden Sun teaches you quickly that navigation plays a more central role than in most JRPGs. You'll have to think outside the box, remembering that objects can be manipulated and your party can hop across empty tiles. Seems basic, but sometimes it does slip your mind. You're encouraged to explore seemingly basic areas more thoroughly. This gives dungeons and towns more value and adds beneficial collectibles to the game. You're also allowed to map any two Psynergies to the shoulder buttons, which makes everything a bit more convenient. Of the many Psynergies, few are as simple and yet impressive as Ivan's mind-reading ability. The catalyst for its use is Ivan's predicament. We don't know where the Shaman's Rod is, but we do know that it was stolen, so we gotta walk around town interrogating the villagers, without them knowing that they're being interrogated. Once Ivan joins your party, you can use this ability on every single NPC in the game. Sometimes the result of mind reading is just kinda humdrum, but every once in a while you'll get some genuinely funny or interesting dialogue. And the thing is that mind reading is never used outside of one or two instances I can think of. So the minute you leave Vault, you're liable to forget that it's even an option. Yet, the developers effectively doubled the amount of NPC dialogue in the game just in case you want to use the ability. It reminds me of the OG Fallout games where they rewrote sections just in case your character is stupid, or Majora's Mask where you get totally different dialogue depending on which mask you're wearing. It's not just a significant workload for the original writers, but also the translators, so hey, kudos to them all. Whether or not you personally care, it's hard not to appreciate such a neat supplementary feature. I like this guy who lowers the bridge. He'd never say it to your face, but he's just fucking overjoyed when you cross that bridge. Do something you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. So anyway, after a neat little whodunit segment complete with a catch and tickle the bad guys minigame, Ivan permanently joins the group. Hammet's been kidnapped by thieves, the world is on the verge of destruction, these goals coincide more or less. We'll soon find ourselves in the town of Bilibin, greeted by a tree that looks like a man. Okay, I'll take your word for that one. It's a cute little place, but it, as well as the nearby town of Kolyma, have been subject to a curse that's turned its citizens into trees. Once again, rather than pursuing our own pressing objectives, we lend a helping hand. This one makes a bit more sense though, because instead of finding some guy's missing stick, we're trying to save lives. Okay, it's more than a stick, but Isaac doesn't know that. This section of the game involves looking for sentient trees within Kolyma Forest who created the curse. As a setting, Kolyma Forest stands out more than almost any other dungeon. For one thing, I think its puzzles strike a good balance of simple and approachable, while providing an adequate challenge. From beginning to end, it's also one of the longer dungeons in the game, reinforcing this idea that you as the player need to come prepared in Golden Sun. Dungeons in this game can be quite long, and though I don't think they ever become tedious, you can definitely be caught with your pants down if you don't bring items. For this reason, one of the first spells Isaac learns is Retreat, which sends you to the beginning of a dungeon. Golden Sun's approach to dungeon crawling seems somewhat reminiscent of Shining the Holy Ark as well. They, especially in the later game dungeons, can test your endurance. I will say that part of the reason they never seem excessive or frustrating is because the dungeon experience is balanced quite well. This is a game with random encounters, and they are definitely still a thing in dungeons, but the encounter rate in rooms with tougher puzzles is mercifully low, sometimes not having any encounters at all. This is smart. This is very smart. There is few things more frustrating than having to experiment with puzzle solutions with random encounters getting in the way. We finally reach the tree spirit who's none too happy to see us. You know, there's something familiar about this boss battle music. This isn't a joke, by the way. This is actually the moment in-game where I realized that the soundtrack was composed by Sakuraba. It's a great soundtrack. For those who don't know, Motoi Sakuraba is a very prolific composer in the JRPG sphere. He's probably best known for Tales, although he's made some pretty iconic tracks for the Dark Souls games as well. For my money, Golden Sun is probably my favorite work he's done, at least of those that I've heard. Now don't get me wrong, there are some real bangers in the Tales games, and Sif's boss music lives rent-free in my head. But there's some inverse logic at work here with Golden Sun. This is a Game Boy Advance game. The few channels and bit-crushed quality of its samples should be very limiting, but it's actually some of the most enjoyable music I've heard from Sakuraba. Now, the GBA does not have a dedicated sound chip, and as such there's always going to be a tinniness you can't get rid of, short of reconstructing the music yourself, which a lot of talented people actually have done. In spite of this tinniness, Golden Sun's music is full of depth. There's a very rich and warm quality to it that I don't typically associate with the GBA. Sakuraba's composition style remains very interesting to me. Often dungeon tracks incorporate odd time signatures and strange chord progressions which create a kind of disorientation and uncertainty. For instance, this track that plays in the Mercury Lighthouse has a pitch bending that just makes my stomach churn. It's unusual and takes center stage, where dungeon music usually sits in the background, providing atmosphere. Yet it's totally appropriate used as sparingly as it is. It's great puzzle-solving music, and of course it's also broken up by the battle music too. It is very odd though. I pointed out in my Tales of Symphonia video that you can see Sakuraba's progressive rock influence from a mile away, and I maintain that here. I don't know if it's just the drum samples, but there's kind of an 80s rock ballad that a lot of the music reminds me of as well. Colosso being a track that comes to mind here. course, there's a lot more of the traditional tracks here as well, kind of that world music you expect from a globe-trotting JRPG. There's a particular pan flute sound that Sakuraba loves to use when composing for Camelot, and I definitely associate that with the studio's games. It's more conventional stuff here, but very memorable. The Revelation music really jumps out to me as one of the game's strongest tracks. Now there's one more track, a very special track, that I wish to talk about, but the time is not yet right. Golden Sun's soundtrack frequently tops best of lists for the GBA, and it's real easy to see why. It defies the limitations of its console and becomes something really special. I didn't grow up with Golden Sun, but I get the feeling that if I did, some of these tracks would really tug on the old nostalgia strings. After battling the angry tree spirit, things are not returned to normal. We'll have to find the healing water of Mercury in order to heal the tree and reverse his spell. This is actually a stepping stone in the larger scheme of things. So we need to find the elemental stars, stop the lighthouse from being lit. We run into Ivan, who needs to find his master. We don't have any leads anyway, so we go with him. We reach Bilibin, tree people. We reach Kolima, tree people. We go talk to the tree man. He's pissed. He needs healing water. We head north to the village of Emil. Oh look, it's near the Mercury Lighthouse. We need to go to the lighthouse anyway. Let's just kill two birds with one stone. The game will often lead you via breadcrumb trail away from your main objective. You may have to remind yourself of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Then suddenly, sometimes unexpectedly, you're snapped back into the main conflict. This type of progression where thing happens and then side quest happens and then thing happens and so on, it's not uncommon in JRPGs. I typically compare it to the Dragon Quest games when I come across it. That's true to an extent here, but it often feels like Golden Sun wants you to forget about your primary motivations altogether or to see them as non-urgent. Ultimately, I do think it affects the pacing of the story negatively. It feels like you're jumping through a lot of hoops, but you don't accomplish all that much in the grand scheme of things. I'm going to try to extrapolate on this point with examples as we go through the game. As mentioned, the town of Emil is near the Mercury Lighthouse. Its keeper, a healer named Mia, detects intruders, which doesn't bode well for the lighthouse, but gives us a much-needed lead. The Mercury adept Mia agrees to join the party as its fourth and final member as we traverse the lighthouse in search of the intruders. Reaching the top, it seems the lighthouse has already been lit via the destruction of the Mercury star. Saturos, much to his surprise, has become bitch-made as a result of this. That's because he's a Mars, or fire adept, and the Mercury light is associated with water. Lighting it has sapped his strength. I like that. Too often villains seem to have all these meticulous plans that just go off without a hitch. They know all the ins and outs, exactly what to anticipate. But every step of the way in Golden Sun, all characters, good and bad, are like, yeah, I don't fucking know what'll happen, but we gotta do it though, cause we gotta. People see malice and incompetence as mutually exclusive, but I don't think that's always the case. Saturos is beaten by the party, but he's promptly rescued by Alex, who we saw back at Sol Sanctum. Alex and Mia are both descendants of the Mercury clan, keepers of the lighthouse, which has left Mia confused and disturbed by his actions. He should be preventing people from lighting the lighthouse, not lighting the lighthouse. Whatever his motivations, the only clear truth is that the Mercury Lighthouse is now a lost cause, so it's time to move on to the next one and hope we catch them there. I have a bone to pick with the story at this point. Was it just a gigantic coincidence that both the enemy group and our party decided to head to the Mercury Lighthouse first? I mean, we weren't ever told to go to a specific lighthouse, so there's like a 1 in 4 chance that we would pick this one, right? There's also a 1 in 4 chance that they would pick this one. I guess 1 in 3 if you need the corresponding adept type in order to access the lighthouse. Not that Isaac and Garrett would have known that when they set out, but I don't know, I'll be charitable here and say maybe the village elder quickly told them about that before they left. That's still a real shot in the dark. Also consider that we just happened to arrive at the lighthouse at the exact same time that Saturos and Menardi did. That's a coincidence, on top of an already pretty significant one. What if we got here way before them? What if they went to a different lighthouse? Would we just sit here and wait for them to show up? That would have gone even worse. I mean, the only reason we beat them now is because they lit the Mercury Lighthouse, which weakened Saturos. If we stopped them at the door and said, "Hey, you're not going anywhere, Buster, give us those stars back," he would have just fucking killed us. I'm not usually one to harp on minor inconsistencies, but this is a pretty big thing. Adding insult to injury, it's one that could have been solved easily in the writing process. We've got all these escapades and capers that have little to do with the main story, but they easily could have. What if the thieves who stole the shaman rod had a run-in with Saturos and Menardi? Maybe after being beaten they'd spill the beans and tell you that, "Oh, we saw them going to Mercury Lighthouse," or maybe they mentioned something, I don't know. Some kind of direction just to justify the contrivance. It's very odd that Golden Sun rarely seizes the opportunity to value add its numerous pit stops. After bottling some mercury water, which sounds kind of like a syphilis cure from the 1800s, we take it back to Kolyma Forest and heal Tret's soul. It does involve backtracking through the forest dungeon in its entirety again, but I like to space my negativity out a little bit, so no comment. While Tret's anger is subdued, it wasn't born from nothing. The surrounding villages were clear-cutting Kolyma Forest in the name of progress. I like how you can actually see how true that is. Wood palisade wall, tree stump houses, even the area puzzle is related to logging. The Psynergy stones twisted Tret's anger into malice, which is why he spread those tree person spores. It's nice that he's able to undo the damage, but I can't help but feel that there's a lesson everyone should be learning about environmentalism or something here. Some villagers make comments about how naughty they were, but the guy who ordered the clear cut is like, "Thanks for solving my problem," and I guess we just have to hope it doesn't happen again. Tret gives the party a lead for south of the river, which leads us to the most advanced looking section of Golden Sun's map. See? They have a Pizza Hut and everything. In all seriousness, I love these East Asian inspired sections in RPGs. Listen real closely to the music that plays here, tell me if you think that sounds familiar. There's a place here where you gotta demonstrate your Psynergy by knocking this pillar over, and you really gotta stand in a specific place to do it. It was to the point where I thought I was doing something wrong, but nope, just slightly off kilter from the intended spot. It's kinda bullshit, rarely a problem, but still there. For the most part, the structure of Golden Sun and its world map funnels you along. Later on, you'll be given the chance to wander a bit more freely, and this can lead to confusion, especially if you took a break from the game and came back. You're liable to be completely lost. Even in these more linear sections though, sometimes the thing that you're supposed to do is very specific, makes you second guess yourself. I can see younger players getting hopelessly stuck at certain points, but hey, that's what the Prima Guide is for. Hope you were saving your allowance, kid. The people in this area practice a form of Psynergy, but they call it Ki. This is something that our characters are continually surprised by. Turns out that Vale wasn't so chosen-y after all. There's a small side plot in this area involving a kung fu master named Fei and his daughter named Fei Ji. This entire section once again doesn't really add much to the value of the story. It fleshes out some details such as the importance of the Silk Road in this world, why you're forced to detour, and the nature of Psynergy stones. You're also informed that certain abilities are restricted to different adept types, such as mind reading for Jupiter adepts or warping around for Mercury adepts. Good stuff to know, but not really substantial enough to demand new characters and a whole new arc. It feels ultimately like another low-stakes situation with untapped potential. The upshot of the deal is that there's a pretty lengthy and entertaining dungeon which involves minecarts and changing water levels. I know half of you just screamed when I said that. Don't worry, it's not bad, and as a palate cleanser, it's followed by a desert area where the heat damages you over time. That one's actually also not bad. You learn a new Psynergy called Reveal, which shows hidden details in the environment. In this case, you can find oases which reset your heat damage meter back to 0. I appreciate that the very act of traversing is often turned into a puzzle or minigame in Golden Sun. It keeps the gameplay variety surprisingly high for a game of this type, and there's almost always something fresh to experience in each area. The party arrives in Calais, Ivan's hometown and the domain of his master, Hammett. Yeah, remember him? He's the whole reason Ivan decided to come with us, but you'd be forgiven if you lost track of that a long time ago. He's still missing, and speaking with his wife reveals some backstory regarding his business success and the family's history with Ivan, though precious little of the latter if you ask me. At some point later in the game, you'll have an opportunity to rescue Hammett. This involves finding a hidden entrance to a bandit village and using a stealth Psynergy to avoid detection while navigating. It's pretty lengthy and critical to Ivan's personal story, and the reason I mention it out of order is because it's entirely optional. This section represents a significant chunk of gameplay, and it's not the only long optional quest either. Of course, the game is peppered with smaller optional encounters, such as a cave back in the hometown of Vale. For the most part, these serve to reward the perceptive player. If you can recall a very conspicuous boulder from 11 hours ago that couldn't be interacted with, now's the time to pay it a visit and be rewarded in the process. But the rescuing Hammett subquest is much more significant than any of that. That this is the case is a double-edged sword. Ivan's primary motivation up to this point is finding Hammett, so doing anything other than saving him wouldn't make any sense. It's just odd that they leave it up to the player. Overall though, I think that the game is better for making this non-mandatory. I respect the cojones of programming in a unique Psynergy, lots of dialogue, always lots of dialogue, a village, secrets to uncover, and then placing all that responsibility on the player. Now, people always talk about JRPG tropes, scenes, or settings that are repeated often. Which are the most beloved, the comfiest, if you will. There's obviously the cozy snow village, stuff like campfire scenes. It's all great, but I don't think boat scenes are given enough credit. There's nothing like a good boat. Final Fantasy VII, great boat. Legend of Dragoon, nice boat. Skies of Arcadia, I mean, come on, enough said. If you include airships, the list of good boats is nigh endless. Anyway, there's a boat in Golden Sun, and it's pretty good. This particular boat is mostly good because of the visual design. I mean, come on, look at that juicy pixel art, the crystal blue water, those cerulean skies. The party follows Saturos across the sea, and while on the ship, we are tasked with fending off monster attacks on the boat. The ship's rowing team is picked off one by one, and you have to choose from a bunch of self-important ship passengers to replace them. I don't know if there's a significant consequence, but if you choose a specific rowing team, you can start another side quest. I didn't though, so we'll get back to that later. Arriving on the continent of Gondowan, your first stop will be Tolby. This is the biggest city in Golden Sun, though like most RPGs, you do have to do a little bit of abstract thinking. It's got gambling dens, minigames, a coliseum, a market, so even though there's only like 7 houses, you can tell that there would be more if you were really there. We're given our next lead here in the form of Babi, the town's ruler, whose name is Babi. He's apparently up and vanished, and it's left his chief minister in a huff. We can rescue him from Altmiller Cave, which he entered to retrieve the Mystic Draft, a potion that slows the aging process. So, even though his name is Babi, he's actually very old. He's also a Psynergy user, one who's got plenty of interesting things to say. Though just as he's about to, his soldiers arrive and hurry him along because the Colosso finals are about to begin. In case it's not obvious from the name, that's Tolby's Coliseum Championship. It's also your cue to go enter that championship at Babi's behest. Now you can't talk about tropes in JRPGs without mentioning the Coliseum match. We've all seen it before. Main character enters tournament for story reasons, easily dispatches a series of 2-bit dorks, usually, but not always, ending in an unwinnable fight against a half-demon that does 9,999 damage. Usually it plays out quite similarly and isn't too special, but in Golden Sun's case, this is probably my favorite one-off section of the game. So Colosso's tournament doesn't strictly involve fights, but also obstacle courses. Isaac is the only one who can enter, but that doesn't mean the other party members can't help. In each tier of the tournament, you're shown the different obstacle courses. Each one has different Psynergy-related challenges that your party members could help deal with from the crowd. After surveying the challenges, you can hook your party members up with different Psynergies and disperse them to sections as you see fit. They can help make some courses easier and allow Isaac to circumvent others entirely. You'll switch your perspective back and forth each time a new section begins, leading to 9 choices in all. The section rules because it gives you a lot of agency while playing to the game's greatest strengths, that being its puzzle solving. There's brain teasers on the ground that allow you to take your time and think, and also navigational puzzles with Isaac, which, thanks to that opponent tracker, give you some sense of urgency. You still get to fight with the enemy at the end, but if you lose, you miss out on some decent items, and I can't verify this, but it seems like the enemy uses more obnoxious, offensive, and healing items, at least in my experience. If you lose at the Colosseum, instead of getting a game over, Isaac wakes up in bed like the whole thing was just a bad dream. From here you can try again ad nauseum until you win, or continue to wake up over and over again like it was a dream within a dream. It's so ridiculous, I love it. Whether you win the final battle or not, Babi and Yodam have a chat with Isaac, knowing that the crew used Psynergy. But that's okay, your win is just as valid as anyone else's. It's not, you cheated, you fuck, you destroyed the sanctity of this competition. Here, Babi tells of the existence of an ancient people known as Lemurians. He had mistaken the party for Lemurians at first, having had a run-in with them 100 years ago. It seems Babi has become interested in alchemy, as his everlasting youth potion is running dry. The Sage Stone and its alchemical properties would allow for eternal life. Philosopher's Stone, it's a Philosopher's Stone. Babi has been looking for Lemuria for years, but his fleets of ships could never find it. That's why he's built Vale Lighthouse, which is not a good name, in order to find the lost continent. The lighthouse has spotted strange happenings at sea, so Babi asks the crew to investigate, given their ability to use Psynergy. For a number of reasons, Babi is not really a good guy. For once, the party wisely declines and puts their own increasingly urgent problems first. I can't believe it, we didn't agree to get sidetracked for 5 hours. I feel like we're growing as people. Babi sends Yodam with the party to Venus Lighthouse to help us solve our own issues first, but then asks that we help him once it's all said and done. I have another bone to pick with Golden Sun now. Before I do, there's a few things I want to mention that I love about this game that don't really fit elsewhere in the video. First of all, you can basically skip your way through all combat dialogue and animations, leading to fights feeling really expedient. Next, the fact that there's a sleep mode is pretty forward thinking, even if it's not particularly useful in this case. Also, if you sell an important item in game, there's a sort of buyback system that lets you retrieve magic equipment. Finally, the greatest quality of life feature in this game, perhaps any RPG, is that when you purchase new equipment, the storekeeper will not only ask if you want to equip it right now, but he'll also offer to buy your old stuff instantaneously without forcing you to navigate to his sell menu. This is the best. Alright, so now that I buttered the game up with sweet nothings, the pendulum must swing once again to sour somethings. Two, in fact. First, there is so much text dialogue in this game. That by itself isn't a negative. Xenogears has its share of text dialogue, and I relish it there. The problem in Golden Sun is that characters repeat themselves so much. One person will reiterate the same very basic point in several different ways, adding unnecessary fluff and often engaging in these very boring back and forths with other NPCs. Our party always contributes these valueless interjections which just make things take longer. Part of me wonders if the localization team is forced to fill a certain number of text boxes. I can't really understand why else there'd be so much padding. My second issue, and one that drags the game down more for me, is the lack of interesting characters. From our own party to the numerous NPCs we do favors for, nobody stands out. I couldn't think of more than a word or two to describe Garrett, Ivan, and Mia. They're extremely one-dimensional, and it does hurt my ability to care about them and the story. I know some people will probably want to defend the game saying that it's on a Game Boy Advance and it's not reasonable to expect depth from a 2001 handheld game. I'm not totally unsympathetic to that point of view, and it's worth managing one's expectations when it comes to this kind of thing. But that doesn't excuse how bland most of these characters and dialogue are. It's not like the GBA was incapable of having games with interesting writing. I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance had a surprisingly philosophical story. The morality of the main cast's motivations are still argued about to this day. My point is that the power of the GBA wasn't the limiting factor here. There are points in Golden Sun's story, particularly in the beginning, where you get a great sense of the character dynamics. The reason filler content actually rules in JRPGs is because it's a perfect excuse to extrapolate on characters' personalities, see their reactions to ordinary situations, little pieces of their past we can put together. Golden Sun misses that opportunity, and it's especially painful when you see all of the potential it has. There are quote-unquote filler quests in Golden Sun, lots of them. Lots of characters too, with nice little portraits and perfect setups, but the game rarely does anything of value with them. In 25 or so hours, the game never slows down for the sake of the characters. After the prologue, we don't get to hear Garrett's thoughts on the traumatic events from the beginning. We don't come to understand Ivan's sense of loyalty towards Hammett, or Mia's heartbreak over Alex's perceived betrayal. Will some of these qualms be addressed in The Lost Age? To an extent, probably, but my statute of limitations on excusing bland characters ends when I see the game's credits roll. To summarize, Golden Sun would have greatly benefited from more interactions, and, more importantly, more interesting interactions between characters. It's a game of many strengths, some unconventional for its genre, but its weaknesses are prevalent as well. At this point in the game, there's another desert crossing section. The shtick this time is that instead of blistering heat, you've got whirlwinds that can appear and take you back to the beginning of the area. Using the Douse Psynergy will dampen the surrounding sand and bring you back down, which is where those shoulder button shortcuts really come in handy. There's one particular whirlwind in the area which, if left undoused, will carry you to Crossbone Isle, the second major side quest in Golden Sun. There actually is a way to get to Crossbone Isle earlier. Remember when I mentioned the secret route the ship can take? Well, if you choose the absolute worst people for the job of rowing, their sheer incompetence will have you end up at Crossbone. You're limited by your Psynergy at that point though, so you can only really finish the area later in the game. This is essentially Golden Sun's super dungeon. 9 levels of bosses and puzzles, some of the best puzzles in the game, mind you, complete with lots of optional loot. Despite its length, it doesn't necessarily feel like a miserable endurance for 2 key reasons. First of all, with each section completed, you unlock a shortcut that allows for easy access to the surface and back. Second of all, during puzzle solving, the encounter rate is turned down to 0. Thank you, Camelot, for understanding the distinction between challenge and irritation. Many don't. What super dungeon would be complete without a super boss waiting at the end? This is Deadbeard, undoubtedly and perhaps appropriately Golden Sun's hardest boss. Your regular strategies will not work with Deadbeard. Even the borderline exploitative strategy of alternating between total damage reduction and enemy paralysis is limited in its effectiveness, and I was already ashamed that I'd resorted to it at all. I noticed by the end of the game that Camelot uses some clever little design tricks with bosses to prevent the Djinn from being overpowered. The boss will often have abilities that nullify your buffs, and sometimes they'll attack twice in the round, which limits the usefulness of certain abilities. It's pretty smart, still feels like the Djinn have value, but prevents you from outright breaking the game in most cases. Defeating Deadbeard awards you with the Demon Mail, which is the best armor in the game for defense, but also curses your characters. There's a few items in this game that seem too good to be true, and they are. Curses can cause damage each turn or reduce your defense. Visiting a priest a la Dragon Quest can help you nullify a curse, or you can wear a special ring that renders them ineffectual. In the latter case, that Demon Mail is a pretty satisfying reward after a nice challenging gauntlet. So back to the mainland, we follow a breadcrumb trail of wounded soldiers. Oh yeah, we just casually walked away from our responsibilities to go fight the pirate guy for a little bit. Babi was apparently with us the whole time. So we follow the wound- oh, come on. They're still alive. This is their normal standing spray. Shouldn't we get help? Doesn't anyone in this town care? Hello?
It's okay. I'll be fine.
Well, apparently Babi was using his military strength to force the city of Lalavero to build his lighthouse, so honestly, I wouldn't blame him for just letting the chips fall where they may in this situation. Saturos and Menardi's group have taken a local girl named Sheba captive, presumably due to her being a Jupiter adept, which they need. We hear tell of a secret entrance to Venus Lighthouse, located underneath Babi's lighthouse of increasingly dubious ethics. Using a reveal Psynergy, we uncover the way and undergo Golden Sun's final challenge. Venus Lighthouse is likely the most expansive dungeon in the game. That's certainly the case for story-only dungeons, at least. There are a lot of familiar challenges and a lot of unique ideas. One thing Golden Sun is great at is guiding player thinking. For example, you enter this room and see before you the easiest puzzle in the world. Pushing these blocks in the correct place completes a circuit and opens the door. So why even include that? Because now when you enter this room, instead of despairing and saying, "What the fuck am I looking at?" your brain is already completing a circuit of its own. You can say, "Let's get to work," based on previous experience. Another example of this would be the reveal Psynergy, which as I mentioned earlier, is initially used in these rocky outcrops to find oases. The game trains you to identify these environmental cues, so using reveal is usually a matter of intentionality rather than a guessing game. Usually. Sometimes, especially towards the end of the game, you do have to take a shot in the dark and just use every Psynergy you have. But that's the exception rather than the rule, and I maintain that Golden Sun is in the running for best puzzle dungeons in a JRPG. I also have to bring it back to the music, as promised. The theme that plays while you traverse Venus Lighthouse is hands down the best track in the game. This steadfast, triumphant music really makes you feel like you're approaching a literal and metaphorical summit. It also sounds like it could be the opening of a 90s fantasy anime, which I really like. As was the case in the Mercury Lighthouse, we reach the top at roughly the same exact time as Saturos and Menardi's group. This being the climax of the game, the synchronicity is more excusable in the name of coolness, and I won't repeat myself here. It seems there's a disagreement between Felix and the two. Oh yeah, throughout the game, it's difficult to ascertain Felix's real allegiance. Sometimes it seems like he's reluctantly tagging along, and at others he seems to agree with their methods. The confusion will be cleared up, eventually, but for now, they argue. Felix seems in particular to be very concerned with Shiba's well-being. Whatever the context, she clearly means something to him, though Shiba doesn't seem too impressed with the simping, to be honest with you. The duo promise that no harm will come to Shiba as long as the team gives up the Shaman Rod, that MacGuffin from about 18 hours ago. So they agree, and then the party is mad that they don't hand Shiba over, and they're just like, we said we wouldn't let harm come to her, not that you could have her. But I mean, yeah, that is exactly what I was thinking. You're altering the bargain? No, you knucklehead, that was the bargain. Now, pray they don't alter it further. This whole exchange is comedic, and I don't know whether it's intentional or not. The parties duke out their differences, and our crew, with strength cultivated over the course of our journey, comes out on top. Despite that, Felix reveals that he still intends to light the remaining beacons, and we still don't really know what'll happen as a result of that. Saturos and Menardi rise and tell Felix to take Shiba and run, and Felix agrees, but weren't they just fighting with each other? Okay, I'm gonna let it slide, but I'm gonna revisit this whole exchange, and if it doesn't make sense by the time I'm done with the Lost Age, I'm gonna give it a savage rogering. Oh shit, that's not what I thought that meant at all. Saturos and Menardi join together to become the Fusion Dragon, which is a reasonable challenge, but nothing compared to Deadbeard. Like that boss, there are a few ways you can more safely take the Fusion Dragon on by sacrificing efficiency, but you still have to use your brain regardless. The party fells the unquestionably bad guys of the story, which solves one problem. But with Felix and Shiba still able to light the remaining two beacons, the story doesn't end here. Oh, okay, never mind about Shiba. Never mind about Felix. The things we do for love, jeez. Jenna and Kraden are still out there, so that gives reason enough for the party to continue their journey. As the first game concludes, the party resolves to find Jenna and Kraden if there's time, and Babi, I guess, if they run into him, because I guess he's gone too now. The party resolved to do a lot of things, and priorities aren't exactly made clear here. Nonetheless, they're given the key to Babi's ship and set sail for further adventure. Alright, I'm incapable of saying goodbye without at least dropping some kind of conclusion here. Golden Sun is a beautiful game. World-class pixel art and a terrific soundtrack bring its vibrant world to life far beyond what one would expect on the Game Boy Advance. Its plot is also presented in a messy, incongruent manner that fails to bring its characters to life in a meaningful way. In all of its excessive dialogue and numerous sidetracks, the seeds of something greater can be seen, but in matters of story, Golden Sun never hits its stride. Once again, to be clear, I'm aware that The Lost Age provides further context and addresses some of the questions surrounding Golden Sun, which is why I'm not harping on the ambiguities. But taken on its own, after a very promising prologue, the first game fumbles that bag. That said, there's a lot to love about Golden Sun. It oozes Camelot's signature style and places surprisingly creative spins on well-established genre mechanics. The Djinns, for example, act as a class system, a summon system, collectibles, and puzzle-solving mechanics at once. Rarely does the raw gameplay of a JRPG do the heavy lifting when its story isn't up to the task, but this is the case in Golden Sun. Empowering the player in and outside of battle through the use of Psynergy has a novelty that stands the test of time more than 2 decades later. This is thanks in part to the game's dungeon crawls, which do a great job of incorporating those puzzle-solving mechanics without ever feeling at odds with the traditional random encounters. And that freedom of navigation, the satisfaction of having a hunch and feeling vindicated, is half of what characterized Golden Sun for me until the end. The other half was the writing, which, despite a solid translation, is bland and mostly forgettable. You gotta forgive a lot of shortcomings to see the good in Golden Sun's world, not the least of which being that it was designed to only be half of a game. Can the Lost Age retroactively improve the original game's story? No, that's not how it works, but can the additional context improve the overall Golden Sun experience? I can't say for certain, but I intend to find out. Hey, if you made it this far, you must be real cool. You know who else is cool? My patrons, whose Q&A questions I will now answer. Yeah, Shopkeeper is automatically offering to buy my old shit when I buy new stuff. Objectively speaking, the Croque Madame. I don't know if it's underrated so much as I just don't hear people talk about it all that much, but Shadowrun Dragonfall is great. I wouldn't necessarily fanboy for either, but if you're gonna make me choose, I'd go with Wars. I like them both though. Next Generation, granted I haven't seen all of the different series. Cake, and the former, of course. I used to be a speakers man because of my various ear-related issues, but I've gotten headphones to work nicely for me, and I find they help immerse me in my work. This is surprisingly tough, but I've settled on Shadow of the Colossus. Even when I imbibed, I wasn't a blunt man. It just hurts my poor old lungs too much. Hopefully that satiates your curiosity, but before I go, I'd like to thank those in my Persons of Lordly Caliber tier on Patreon, which includes Adam Safranco, Matthew Sean Dick, Banana Turnip, Sleepy, Avil and Hime Takamura, True Manalist, Spencer Kennelly, Smo Bun, I'm Emil Castagne's #1 fan, Captain, BB Squirrel, Shane Shack, Mr. Shifty, Buster Drew, Francois, Fanar, Fenrir Lives, Silvar, Olo Shadow, Guko, Jordan Laughlin, Eldon Rosen, Jordan Miller, Aiden Hudson, Rocket Man, Jay Hyun, Azure Midsummer, Destrega, Tepid Tag Tournament, F, James Adair, Sable Dragon Rook, Cameron himself, Heinel Hander, Kelly Slaughter, Zeta, Caleb Wambold, Nicholas Esposito. Still one breath. I'm gonna have to start incorporating some kind of fucking Wim Hof breathing techniques to get that done without taking a second one. Thank you all for allowing me to live my life, as well as reinvesting into these videos. It is a privilege to entertain you. If you're interested in supporting the show, please consider heading over to Patreon and taking a look. There are a bunch of different rewards, including bonus videos, with more coming soon, starting at just $2 buckaroos. No pressure, you know, just think about it. In any case, thank you everybody for watching. Until I see you next time, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.